Unit 1, Lesson 2, Foundations of Good Writing. So our objectives for this lesson are students will be able to dig deeper into the 4 basics of good writing: audience, purpose, and process. Students will be able to understand the purpose and importance of audience and purpose. Students will be able to learn and practice the writing process. And students will be able to understand the writing rubric and how to use the writing rubric to improve their writing. So first, I want you to think, what is writing? Why is writing important? For many centuries, people have used writing for many different reasons. People use writing to communicate with others. People use writing as an outlet for their own feelings and their own emotions. People use writing to express their creativity. People use writing for employment and for career purposes. So why would that make writing important? Over time, writing has evolved. We've gone from writing on rocks to writing on paper with ink, to writing on a typewriter, to a computer, to a smaller computer, to tablets. But however, regardless of how much writing has evolved, writing still remains a very important skill and aspect of our society. The purpose of writing hasn't changed. Humans write to communicate, whether we are communicating with our children over text to come home early, or with our significant others to let them know who's cooking dinner and to wash the dishes, or in a college class when we are writing essays, analyzing what we're reading. Humans write to communicate. All of those examples are examples of humans writing to communicate ideas and thoughts. So good writing considers what the audience knows and needs. It fulfills the writer's purpose. It includes a clear, definite point. It provides support that explains or proves the main point. Essentially, good writing knows how to fulfill the needs of its audience, how to fulfill the needs for who the writing is meant to be. So if the writing is for my child, where I am letting them know what to do when they arrive home from school, I need to understand that my writing needs to meet the needs of my child. If my writing is for a college class where the professor is asking me to write a narrative or a story, then I need to make sure that I also fulfill that purpose. And to fulfill that purpose, I need to ensure that I have a clear and definite point, which we'll see in the form of topic sentences and thesis statements in a little while. And I also need to make sure that those main points are supported. It's not good enough to say, this is what I feel, or this is what I need, this is what I believe. We have to say, this is what I believe because, and really make sure that our points are proven. Every piece of writing considers the following 3 things: purpose, tone, and audience. And if you see here in the diagram, you see content in the middle of the triangle. Everything that is being considered is related to the content, the material that you are writing about. So again, everything around the triangle is pointing to the content because that is what we are trying to support. We are trying to support the communication of the content. So you consider your purpose, which is the reason why you compose a paragraph or any text. You consider tone, which is the attitude the writer conveys about the paragraph subject. And you consider audience, which is the individual or group whom the writer intends to address. And all of these 3 things together around one content, around one strong point, make a piece of good writing. At the most basic level, there are 3 reasons to write. You write to persuade, to inform, and to entertain. When you are writing to persuade, you are writing to convince the reader of a certain point of view. So you are trying to convince the reader to think the way that you think by persuading them. When you are writing to inform, you teach or give the information to the reader. When you are writing to entertain, you try to hold the reader's attention through enjoyment. And enjoyment isn't always something that's funny or loving. Enjoyment could be a mystery story, but your audience does appreciate mystery, so then they will be entertained by it. So again, at the most basic level, there are 3 reasons why we write. We write to persuade, to inform, or to entertain. Now, when we're thinking about academics, the writing becomes a bit more complex. And because it becomes a bit more complex, it requires more thinking. It requires more purpose. And there are 4 different purposes for writing academically: to summarize, to analyze, to synthesize, and to evaluate. So again, you're going from here, which is at the most basic level, persuade, inform, and entertain, any writing, to a more complex type of writing where we actually have to think about all of these different items. We have to think about complexity, we have to plan, we have to organize. Is our information accurate? Is our information responsible? Is it explicit? Is it objective? How formal do I need to be? All of these things here are considered when we're thinking of academic writing. So now we're going to look at this short passage, and we're going to identify the purpose, the tone, and the audience. So I'm just going to read the passage aloud. This film could easily have been cut down to less than 2 hours. By the final scene, I noticed that most of my fellow moviegoers were snoozing in their seats. I'm gonna get my annotations tool ready because I know that in order to understand what I read, I need to be an active reader. So this film, I can assume here that the topic is something related to a film. I noticed that some of my fellow moviegoers were snoozing in their seats. This tells me a bit about feeling. If they were snoozing, to be snoozing, if I don't know what that means, I can definitely look it up in the dictionary. But since I know, I will write. They are falling asleep. Interesting. So now I want to just do a little bit of annotating here. Maybe the movie was boring. And that's why people were falling asleep. In their seats, although in their seats and were barely paying attention. Yeah, this movie was definitely not a good movie. If you're not paying attention to a movie, if you are snoozing, then obviously the movie's not good. And all the thinking that I'm doing is a part of me being an active reader. So what was happening on screen? Although the director sticks diligently to the book, he tries too hard to cram in all the action. That sounds like the author's opinion. He tries too hard to cram in all the action, which is too ambitious for such a detail-oriented story. If you want my advice, read the book and give the movie a miss. Oh, so the author of this review, this author did not like the movie and is suggesting that people skip the movie. So obviously he did not like the movie at all. So now I'm going to ask myself, was the purpose of this and I'm actually going to go back so that we can see it. Was the purpose to summarize, analyze, synthesize, or evaluate? What was I summarizing a text? Was I analyzing a text? Was I bringing about different parts of information, or was I evaluating? Okay, interesting. So the purpose of this short passage was to evaluate, because as an author, this author was evaluating this film, and there was definitely the author's opinion in here. The tone of this passage was not positive. It was not positive. So I can say the author's tone was negative due to the author not liking the director's version of the movie. So now I can consider who might be a good audience for this passage. I can see this passage showing up in the movie review section of a magazine or a newspaper. I can see movie critics submitting passages like this to help moviegoers identify which movies to go and see. So again, there were a few things that I did here to be an active reader. And also prepare myself to be a good writer by understanding purpose, tone, and audience. So first, annotate while I read. 2, identify audience, purpose, tone, and audience while reading the passage. And 3, identify and define unknown vocabulary. And this is a really big one, because when we identify unknown vocabulary, we are building our own mental toolkit of really good words. So here in this passage, we could have written down diligently, snoozing, we wrote down, and we also could have written down ambitious. 3 very good vocabulary words. So we're going to see a little bit about each one. So academic writing is any writing that requires formal writing. The audience for academic writing can be college professors, employers, if you need to write a complaint letter, or if you need to write a grievance, if an employer is abusing your work hours, for example, or if you need to take a few days off and you need to ask your employer for that. That would all be academic writing. Businesses requesting a proposal, a letter written to the families in a childcare center about closing for the summer or reopening or supplies list, formal requests and or complaints. So again, when you think of academic writing, I want you to think about any writing that requires you to be formal, So what does it actually mean to summarize? When we write to summarize, we shrink to make smaller pieces of information into only the most important information. When we analyze, we examine a text or various texts around a main point. So you might say, children need enough time to play during recess. If that is your thesis statement, you might then find different resources that discuss and prove that in order to be able to analyze and prove your point. To synthesize is to consider the main points from one or more pieces of writing and link the main points together to create a new point, one not replicated in either document. So when you synthesize, you are creating your own ideas and using other ideas to prove it, but your idea is original. To evaluate, to communicate your opinion and justifications about a document or a topic of discussion. So for example, if you're doing the pros and cons of going to college in America, you can talk about the cons of how expensive education is in America, but then you can talk about the pros and how it actually increases the likelihood that you will make a better salary and that you will have a better life in the future. To evaluate. So before you begin writing, first you need to determine your purpose for writing. Who is going to be reading what you wrote? Who is going to be expected to learn from what you wrote? Consider audience. Who is going to be on the other side? And our audience is the intended public for a writing piece. To identify and determine audience, ask yourself, who will be reading my writing? Who will my writing be helpful to? How can I write my writing in a way that is accessible to this audience? So if I'm writing for a group of children, then I should probably limit my vocabulary to words that children will understand. If I'm writing a paper for one of my professors in college, then I need to use academic vocabulary in order to communicate my ideas and show my college level readiness. The next thing that we consider is tone. And tone has a lot to do with feelings. It is your feelings towards the topic that are communicated through writing. So what feeling do you want the reader to get from reading your piece? To identify and determine your tone, ask yourself, how do I feel about the topic that I'm writing about? What feeling do I want the readers / my audience to get from reading my writing? And tone is very important because it can also really confuse the reader. So if you're writing a piece that's supposed to be funny, but your tone comes across as negative or sarcastic, then the reader won't really understand your main point. So it's very, very important to consider tone when we are writing and to consider how are we communicating this tone? Is it via details? Is it via examples? Is it via words that indicate feeling? How is this tone going to be communicated in order to consistently convey that tone? So the big idea here is that good writers consider purpose, audience, and tone before they begin to write. So it's very important that before you write any piece, before you outline, before you write a thesis statement, you ask yourself, what is my purpose? Who is my audience? And what tone do I want to communicate?